apostle, as a prophet, as an evangelist, as a pastor, as a teacher. It fits, but it doesn't fit enough. So I needed the whole hand. Please join us in hands today to give a very, very welcome to Dr. Lance Wallnau as he speaks to us as a powerful hand of God in this season to transform our society.
Thank you, my friend. How many of you have never heard me before or heard of me, for that matter? There we go. That keeps me grounded. I've had more people introduce me as this is how they do it. How many of you have never heard of Lance Wallnau? It's like because I assume it's a compliment because they're trying to figure out how come more people didn't know who I was, but it's true that I'm not very well known. I never, up until the election, I actually never wrote a book, but a lot of the stuff I teach and a lot of the stuff I've researched has come out and been disseminated and been utilized by various people. So if you've ever heard of Seven Mountains, so I originated the idea over a decade ago because I was looking for a visual that could capture what Lauren Cunningham and Bill Bright had come up with as 7 mind molders of culture or 7, spheres of kingdom life. And I thought a picture would probably be the best metaphor for the subject. And it kind of captured some people's imagination. What you are doing in this room right here may look to you like, okay, you get together and you sit at the tables, but you may think that it's kind of like not important. But this is the most advanced model of experimentation going on in the earth today for the church coming together and occupying the spheres of influence that God has assigned. Because we have a false paradigm. I guess if I drew it like this, and maybe most of you could see it, most of us have been taught that in order to change the world out here, whether it's San Antonio or a nation, if we could just establish a city set on a hill, a Christian people gathered together here, and if we could only maybe even grow it, and grow it, and grow it, eventually it would impact all the other kingdoms and spheres of influence. What we found is that out there in the world where families exist, and where education exists, and where government exists, and where media and arts and business exist, that having a bigger percentage of people, even if you've got 50% of the population that subscribes to Christianity, you will not actually shape the culture. You will only be able to exercise sphere influence over the group that you've actually got influence over. Why was Abraham told, not that he was going to have souls as his inheritance? I want you to really think about this because God is updating. Everybody say the word update. God is updating the script for the church, and this directly affects you because you are the wineskin that is shifting. The church will be the last part that will change. And I say that as a person who pastored for 20 years. The institutional church changes slowly, like government. It changes slowly, but the marketplace can shape the change for the future. So here's what you've got. You've got trying to touch San Antonio. You've got these different spheres of influence. But what happened in America? What happened in America, this is great having all these whiteboards. What happened in America is, let's say this is penetrating the mind and the heart of a nation. We have had 30% of American population is actually born again, believe it or not. There's as many as 70% self-identify as Christians. But these arrows show that we have never been aligned. 30%, 30 to 40% in unity could shift anything in America, but we are a fragmented force. You've got enough Christians in San Antonio so that every school district, every mayor, every district attorney should reflect kingdom values. And they don't. And the reason is because, and this is the scary part, 7% of the population is better aligned with their secular progressive worldview than the church is with 30% of the population. The data tells us 7% of the population has positioned itself at the top of these spheres of influence. Now here's what Jesus said. The sons of this age are wiser in relationship to their own kind than the children of light. The truth is that in a battle between sheep and goats, sheep back up and accommodate and goats take over. And so what the church does is it prays, it fasts, it gives money, and it tries to elect a champion sheep to drive everybody out. Then it gets confused when God doesn't send a champion sheep, he sends Donald Trump. But what Donald Trump represented for me was a wrecking ball that would destabilize the status quo and show that an individual who is clearly congruent in their worldview and grounded in competency can rewrite the script even if everybody is against them. So the spheres of influence here, what was Abraham told? My forefather, Abraham, was told, the Jewish side of my family, when I'm in Israel, I'm aware of this all the time. To the Jew, they were told, you'll be the head and not the tail. And to make this abundantly clear, it's above, not beneath. That means within the strata of influence, the believer, who is a child of Abraham, should be the person who is operating in a sphere preeminent capacity. You should be, by the anointing spirit and gifting of God, having a dominating influence over the environment around you, like leaven that is hidden in 3 measures of meal. We should be permeating culture, and the reason why we haven't done it is because we simply have not had a map that reflects the world as it is. We're operating with a flat earth map. The flat earth map doesn't work in a digital age. That map says if we just pray more, fast more, be more holy, repent more, or give our money and our sacrifice and our energy to nonprofit, good, virtuous works more, then we can shape the ship. But here's the problem. The ship is being shaped by more than one sphere. The job of the church is to equip the saints, or the disciples, to go into all the world. We thought all the world was Mozambique and Haiti and Cambodia. And so for years we planted flags and took pictures of missionaries and supported someone in a jungle. The reality is, once that phase of going into all the world geographically is done, there's another phase. It's called going into all the systems. Now I can go into Iran, and thank you, they're doing, actually, Iran, for all the negative press we have with the politics there, they're the biggest nation in revival. 20% of the nation is right now in revival. You don't know that, but that's the data that we're getting from the underground church. I go to China, underground church, 10%. They did this without TBN. They've got 10% of the nation converted. So a lot, you want to go to Africa. It used to be we're burdened about Africa. Africa is the most evangelized continent on the earth. The problem with Africa, now watch this. 3 to 7% of the population can be more powerful, and in some nations in Africa, 50% to 60% are converted. They don't have influence shaping the culture. The money, the wealth, and the power is controlled by globalists and corrupt politicians. So the poverty that is the common lot of the citizen has never changed. Because God's people don't know. It's not just having the big church with signs and wonders. It's about having big leaders with big ideas that can rule in the different spheres of government. Now, so let's take a look. Government, you're to be the head and not the tail in San Antonio. That doesn't mean all of you are in an elected office, but you should be playing a strategic role to make sure that the most anointed or capable person to govern is elected. And if they don't pass the litmus test of what you guys see as being God's will, then you take responsibility for solving the problem. Does that make sense? Instead of blaming the world. Do you know what we do in America when things don't work? We write a best-selling book on the end times. Because what I found is we have more faith for judgment on America than for its redemption.
That's good.
When I came on the scene saying I think Donald Trump's going to be president, and was running against 16 other better, more Christian, experienced politicians than him, I looked at that, I said, I'm going to predict that this guy's going to be president. But I looked at that, I was operating against The Harbinger, which was the #1 best-selling book in America. 1 million Christians had voted with their pocketbook to invest in getting informed on how America was getting flushed down the toilet in judgment, while God was raising up an unlikely deliverer out of the Isaiah 45 chapter of the scriptures that says, verily thou art a God that hides thyself. He hid himself in the 45th president. I can see there's an underwhelming response right now. So here's the problem. We don't even know, God's acts are still hidden from the people who are supposed to be above.
That's right.
Amen. So if you don't believe what I'm saying here, let me show you how the left discipled America while we slept. While we had our biggest meetings, our best fundraising, and our most explosive growth in ministries, here's what happened. By the way, how do I do this?
The little keys on
Huh?
the arrows
Oh,
on
the
the
arrows?
keyboard. Yep.
Oh.
Ta-da.
All right, here's the timeline of convergence. You're right now in the San Antonio's 300th anniversary. corresponding with the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. This is interesting. It's right now you're in the season of 70 years after Israel became a nation, and 50 years after Jerusalem was retaken as the capital. I look for numbers because frequently in the Bible, numbers will start to overlap with each other like data points that tells you you're in a moment of convergence. I look for patterns. You're in the pattern right now. Most people have missed this pattern, but this will be my next book, and this book is coming out soon. The pattern is Jeremiah prophesies. He prophesies 70 years captivity. Daniel gets the prophecy, intercedes in order to create a transition. Out of the transition, Cyrus comes along, who nobody expected to come into power. And when Cyrus comes along, he begins to make unpredictable tweets at midnight. And releases decrees. And his decrees actually release the church to a new season of vigorous activity, reforming their house. Out of the reformed house comes the reformed society. And here's the amazing thing. Outside this window, I see a great big DMCA. Wall or not, we're ready. So the whole area here is talking about the wall. The curious thing about building the wall is it's not really, with Nehemiah, about Mexicans. Right. In Nehemiah, it's about the proverb that says a nation or a city that lacks self-control is like a people broken into and plundered. Meaning that a nation that no longer has self-government and sovereignty, it becomes plundered by other sources, other agendas, and other nations. Building the wall is a metaphor about resealing the sovereignty of the United States and nations to determine who they are, how they glorify God, rather than being assimilated into a global game where banking and citizenship becomes collapsed into a whole other entity that robs you of the glory of your inheritance as a nation.
Amen.
We are here to deliver nations.
That's good.
The gospel of the kingdom is a gospel to nations.
Yes.
The making of disciples wasn't some disciples in Guatemala. It was Guatemala being a sheep nation. And right now there are leaders of Christians that are in government in various places that are ready to respond. I looked at the pattern and I said, as that was the pattern, there's prophecy, prayer, and intercession stored up for America, for the nations of the earth. There are martyrs that have given their life for the soil of their land. God hears that. I was talking to Lou Engle. He said, Lance, he said, this is what we were doing. We were praying. It was the Daniel prayer, the Daniel fast. And he was like kind of an eccentric intercessor. But he said, we were fasting and praying for this election because we knew it was a turning point what happened in America. Out of that comes the unusual emergence of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's the byproduct of 20 million sage cons, spiritually active, governmentally engaged conservatives. 20 million, a new category, different than born again, different than evangelicals. No Democratic or Republican pollster knew they even existed. 20 million people who watched government and nervously observed the trend line decided that they were all going to go out and vote, and 88% of them pulled the lever in the same direction. It was the greatest electoral phenomena in terms of church alignment in the history of Christianity and politics in America. Donald Trump, 70 years after Israel becomes a nation, not intending to fulfill prophecy, what does he do? He reaches back to the creation of Israel and moves the embassy to Jerusalem. Why? Because this is Cyrus. So I prophesied this guy would be a Cyrus when he was 15 points behind and unelectable. Now that he's president, then this is hilarious. I got the left-wing media hammering me, and their timing couldn't have been better. They're all writing articles on the evangelical mindset and how we could possibly be, people like me, justify a behemoth, a caveman like Donald Trump as God's vessel. They call it vessel theology. And they're writing about guys like me saying Donald Trump is Cyrus. The day that Benjamin Netanyahu goes to the White House and tells Donald Trump, you are a modern Cyrus for Israel.
Wow.
Boom. Suddenly the story changes. The liberals have to drop the articles. They have to start writing them on. What the heck is Netanyahu talking about? Because Trump is the Cyrus for the church. What does Cyrus do? Cyrus provides a momentary stopgap in the history of Israel so that reformation in the house and reformation in the nation and in the cities can take place. Does that make sense? Because my premise is God is inviting you into a bigger game than you're participating in, and you've got a much larger canvas to paint on than the canvas that you're painting on right now. Does that make sense?
That's awesome.
And if that doesn't make sense, I'll tell you how your opposition treats history in the moment you're in. So let's take a look at the disruptive change process. What does God do in San Antonio, in your own life? Let's start with a revival. Let's start with awakening. The first thing happens with the status quo. The next thing that happens is some kind of introduction of a new element. whether that's Martin Luther or the creation of a group like this, or whether it's in Azusa Street, or whether it's in Upper Room. Out of it comes chaos. The first reaction of the status quo is an immediate distress over the emergence of the new thing and how it disrupts what was ordinary. Does that make sense? This is all innovation, by the way. None of you in business should be surprised by this, because this is how innovation works. This is social media coming on the scene for everybody that was using print media and television. But out of the chaos comes the practice of a new possibility. And out of the new possibility comes smartphones, digital technology, new global economies, new ideas, or a new status quo. I'm here to tell you that we have lived in a period of time where God has politically done in the United States a shaking, introducing a new element that's produced chaos, which could lead to the formation of something that heaven wants to bring on the earth, which is an invigorated church that is moving to touch nations, not just get people to heaven when they die. So let's talk about Jesus' inheritance as nations. Haven't heard much talk about this, but I think it's a big subject in heaven. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and the holy angels with him, then shall he sit on the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all what?
Nations.
This was brought to my attention from Harold Caballeros, a guy who's going to run for president, mega church pastor who's going to run for president in Guatemala. He said, we got 90% of the country's Christian. Why can't we have an incorruptible government? He said, Jesus is gathering who, Lance? And I said, people. He said, read it again. I actually had people in my mind when I read this verse. He said, it says nations. What is he separating when he returns? Nations, nations. And this is where your harbinger eschatology fits. In the end, when he comes back, there will be a clear delineation between sheep nations and goat nations. Two types of nations. What does that tell you? That tells you two things. One, not every nation is a goat nation. And the other one is, where are the sheep nations? At some point, somebody's going to start to realize that nations are the inheritance of the Lord. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Take a look at Psalm 2. When Jesus comes out of the grave, the Father says, the first thing he says to him, ask of me and I'll give you the nations for your inheritance. Right. Who's even believing for cities? Muslims believe for nations, started 500 years after the resurrection of Jesus, and they've got a whole slew of Islamic nations, and they've got Islamic Sharia banking systems. When was the last time you saw a Christian banking system?
Right.
How did the left build the most powerful coalition in history? After the losses in the election of 2000, the left realized they needed to rebuild their movement. Your counterpart, the strategic contemporary big thinkers in business and government and economics and academia got together. And they got together in Boston. Political players like John Podesta, Harold Ice, Rob Stein, Sid Blumenthal, and others came together in Boston to develop a strategy to fill the voids of the leftist movement. It looked like evangelicals in Christianity and mega churches were just like a juggernaut. How are we ever going to stop this machine? And boy, did they stop it. And boy, to this day, are we ignorant of what happened. The group developed a firm called Thunder Road, flying at 30,000 feet, evaluated the needs of the left and ways to fund those needs. You get that? The needs of the left, meaning an ideology to shape the way Americans think. They were out to disciple America. They had to figure out who was influencing America and who needed the money and the organization to do a better job doing it. Over the next 10 years, they created the most powerful political coalition in history, funded by coordinated giving. Where are the business people in the room? Business people? Who here is called to create wealth, create jobs, eradicate poverty? Who's here called to make money and not ask someone else for the money? I don't know why you're sitting at different tables. You should always sit with that person over there. So over the next 10 years, what did they do? They created an action plan. And this is so brilliant. They got the financing. They got together and built an action plan for transforming America. Discipling America. Did we do that? No. Christians didn't do it. They did what you're doing. They got together in their spheres and said, let's change the whole situation. First thing they did was they created a think tank. They created a think tank because there was no central new think tank. And it's called the Center for American Progress. They needed media outreach to communicate with a new generation of technologically savvy millennials and baby boomers. They called it Media Matters. They needed opposition research. And I love the names they come up with. They're so wholesome in American Pie. This is an organization for finding the dirt on your opponent and threatening him with public humiliation in order to pull him out of competition as a candidate. They call it Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. They wanted to get out the vote, so they got a hold of everyone from Barbra Streisand to George Clooney, and they created America Votes. They knew the entertainment, the arts. Where's my arts, people? They knew that artists can create the music, the songs, the movies, and have a natural celebrity platform to endorse candidates. They needed money, so they created the Open Society Democracy Alliance, and George Soros showed up to look at the strategy. They created a social technology movement and found Michael Moore was a big, blow-hearted, ambitious individual who just needed better structural management and funding. So they drafted him to run MoveOn.org. This is how apostles think.
Mm-hmm.
If the organization doesn't exist, we create it. They didn't create the Thunder Road group where their name was on it because they didn't want anyone to know that these groups were all separately organized by them and run by them and funded by them. They would have to look like they were a movement. So what ideas are shaping culture in the world right now? In each of the spheres, what they did was they created an alliance to penetrate academia. An alliance to redefine the nature of family and what is a man and a woman, and can a man and a man be married. The LGBTQ community literally became the 3% of the, this is 3 to 4% of the population, folks. It's not the majority. They did a bigger job in rewriting the textbooks your children are reading than the 30 to 50% that still are boing, trying to figure out what's going on. So if you want to see San Antonio change, you've got to take a look at who are the thought leaders at the top. The reason why a mountain is an important metaphor to me is because it implies, by its very nature, someone's at the top and someone's at the bottom. To be the head is the goal. To be above is significant. Or to have influence with the head is the goal, because the head is where the decisions are made that affect everybody downstream. These are the people that are in the cockpit flying the plane, no matter what kind of revival or party's going on down below. My suggestion is that cultures change from the top down. Therefore, Reformation must involve a collision of gatekeepers and powerful interests when big ideas collide. Revival goes from the bottom up. Reformation comes from the top down, because Reformation is institutional. Revival is personal.
Right.
We would much rather have personal revival, some cosmic awakening, a sweeping move of God where nobody gets their hands dirty and the Lord does all the dirty work for us and changes the way people think and packs them into churches.
Right.
Never happened once in history. Didn't happen in Azusa. Won't happen now. This is what does happen. The left created their political funding structure. The consultants, the leaders, created the Thunder Road Group, and they funded and vetted the leadership for all these movements, coordinated the strategy so that no independent action is taking place. As I learned in Washington when I started meeting with Tony Perkins and the various important people that represent Christian influence in Washington, I found this out. The difference between the right and the left is this. Christians on the right love each other but don't work together.
Right. That's right. Very true.
People on the left despise each other but all show up in the same firefight.
That's right.
They have more unity held together by other people's dough than we have.
Right. That's true.
Because we like silos. We like autonomy. This is George Soros. As a financial, this is his network. Those of you that are called to influence and fight, why don't you have more wealth? The Christians better get over this guilt trip about money.
Amen.
There's money out there, and if the sheep don't get it, the goats will. You should be thinking about having enough money so that you don't know what to do with it, so you can find the people that you can support. Dotted lines are indirect board members. Straight lines is where George has a direct access, and it's one of his organizations. That's how wealth and influence go together in the Seven Mountains. Well, anyway, that was my thought for the day. I just do real quick. We're going to do, how much time do I have left? 5 minutes, 2 minutes? Am I done?
No, we have 12 minutes.
12, exactly. 1 minute for each apostle.
Ooh.
All right, so. Would you guys like to see how the left does it? I just showed you that. But here's how it's done in San Antonio. You got to understand how it's done in San Francisco, how it's done in Atlanta. So let's start with the business people. Where's my business table? Business table, would you please rise? Please stand. This is important. This is purely for participatory purposes. Business people, the Lord wants to release to you vast sums of money. He wants to release to you the capacity to have a warehouse and a storehouse of wealth so that you can fund any idea that God gives you. Any need that is there. Doesn't mean that other people here don't have models that make money. It just means that I'm going to say the business mountain, the Sorosian world, these are the big funders. These are the big donors. These are the big cats everybody wants to get a hold of. So, put your hands up. Put your hands up. Lord, I ask you to increase the wealth capacity of every one of these individuals so that they will be able to have, acquire, and facilitate great wealth release in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you do me a favor? Where's the academic mountain? Education? Education, please rise. Here's how it works. In order for these business guys to change America, they need you. Now, before we get to the textbooks, curriculums, and teachers, and all the stuff you're going to do to propagandize the next generation with your worldview, I just want white papers. I want white papers on how transgender people are traumatized by rejection, and the suicide rate is 70% among the 3 people maybe that we know of that died in San Antonio confused over their gender. So you guys, I want you to just go. You guys toss the ball. Just throw it. Boom. Boom. You know why? Catch it. Because they're going to fund the academic research. And those of you that have universities, you need to know who are the people that are going to be able to do the white paper research. Okay, you guys ready? You got the white paper? You write the white paper. Where's my media people? Oh, media's right here. Perfect. All right, media, please stand up. Remember these words. Sustained pattern of public persuasion. You want to get everybody saved in San Antonio? You've got to be guilty of what the Pharisees accused the apostles of. You have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and now you intend to bring this man's blood upon us. What did they succeed in doing? They filled Jerusalem with their worldview. I don't think we've done that job. You know why? Because media is essential for the worldview to get out. You guys are the people, when you sneeze, everybody else catches it. So what I need you to do is I need you guys to throw them the white paper. Throw it to them. Catch it, media. Boom. Now, on news, social media, on television, all over, we're going to be hearing about the latest research regarding transgender suicide rates and the oppression. Then we got to have some documentary stories. Go out to the campuses, go to the families. We want to create some heartstring-pulling, well-crafted. They don't even have to be true. They just have to be very effective. But for you guys to really do this well, business people, throw them some more cash. Come on, because you guys are funding me. Oh, there you go. You're invigorated. So we need some more stories. All right, we got the stories going. By the way, throw another white paper. I need another white. Harvard now is giving. Oh, Harvard also, as well as Stanford. Thank you very much. You got the money there. Who hasn't working yet? Government's not working. So here's what government's doing. Media, wave over to government. Because what you're doing is you're signaling to these cats that they can now start moving legislation because public opinion is starting to get shaped. See how that's working so far? So you guys are going to start to run on a platform on this popular theme that media has agitated thanks to the funding that is coming from the research that's over here. Research and storytelling. Everybody knows that data is true. So Harvard doesn't lie. So we got the Harvard study. We got CNN. Come on, these guys are, and then these guys are funding over here. Who isn't working yet? Where's my arts table? Thank you. Arts. Oh, arts and media arts is hanging out with education. Well, today we have some cross-pollination.
Six times.
Okay, artists, I need you to be working with media because I need George Clooney, I need Barbara, I need the West Coast Hollywood people to start doing some movies. I want Brokeback Mountain. I want heartbreaking stories about gay men breaking up on the Marlboro Plains in Texas. So you guys are good, but they need money. Throw it over. Thank you. Boom. All right, you got money coming over to you. Now we're going to have the artists, and by the way, some of you artists are going to be over here. Media, please put your hands up. Media is going to have you on their program interviewing, because after all, we're interested in what these celebrities have to say. Celebrities are highly credible, as we all know. So, who has not participated yet in the Game of Thrones?
Family is back there and church.
What?
Church and family.
Church and who?
Family.
Oh, that's right. You see, this is the problem. We're not involved with the process.
Right.
We're putting our money and time and organization in a vehicle that doesn't do this process.
Right.
Because they don't advance the kingdom by being controversial and doing white papers, being on TV, discussing hot topics. However, we do pray. So, what I'm going to tell you is this. The family mountain and the church mountain actually represents what we call community organizing. Would you please stand up? This is what the left knows. You go to the families and the cities. You go to the campuses. Now, in families and in churches and nonprofit organizations like Thunder Road built, they're all forms of church. They're 527s. And they're 501c3s. And while you're all worried about getting in trouble for getting politics into the pulpit, They're aggressively mobilizing nonprofits all the time, and nobody ever challenges them.
Right. That's right.
What we need is a protest. Now, we're not looking for a violent protest because we're conservatives. We like peaceful, civilized protests. We even bring window caulking with us. We'll fix anything that gets broken. But what I need is, I need you guys to all hold up your signs. Hold up. Because we're talking about stop the madness, restore the family. Whatever it is, we're going to have, and what's amazing is, it's going to be a spontaneous protest at a public venue, like maybe the courthouse, and you're all going to have signs that look the same, but we're all going to make believe that this is spontaneous. Because that's the way America sees media. So you guys are going to show up because you know why we need that? Media, please, stand up.
Yes, sir. Come on.
You need that protest. You know why? That's the fast track. Oh, you guys need money. Throw some money. Oh, the activists, they'll start waiting because you're getting paid to do this. This is a Craigslist event. You're doing it. All right, you're making your money now. Okay, so media covers community organizing at a family, spiritual, local, and nonprofit level. Now, government, please stand. You have a movement. They will elect those empty suits that match the worldview that these people bought right there. Mm-hmm. Them, working with them and them and them, creates the pressure on an adolescent community that doesn't know the difference between right and wrong, because no preachers are necessarily exposing this game. And so, what the heck? Seems like a nice person. They're voting for you. And what are you enacting? You're enacting the agenda that Thunder Road created to disciple your city. Mm-hmm. Please have a seat. That's the lesson. And every one of us is going to be accountable. Every one of us is going to be accountable. I got two friends with me that are important. You know about Jeff McFarlane? That fine young man, trained in Washington as an oil and gas man, works with establishing prayer groups around the world, works closely with the presidential prayer breakfast stuff. He moved down here in San Antonio. I just found out about it 2 days ago. But here, I told him, go to the meeting. I said, he said, I don't even know what I'm doing here. I said, well, you're here to go to this meeting. So he's there. James Hall, would you please stand up? So Jim is instrumental. How many of you are excited about if you're aware of what's happening? Guatemala decided they were going to move their embassy to Jerusalem. Here is one of the strategic operations guys that became a CEO that got involved with helping governments become sheep nation governments and eradicate corruption. He's in the project of moving the embassy, and his business is bringing massive returns to people that are interested in new energies, because righteous governments are looking for righteous business people. And he's the hub of the righteous contacts that are going on into nations right now in Europe and in Central America. So if you've got interest in that, you want to talk to him. Let me pray for you. Father, San Antonio is in its 300th year. It's time. Bianca's here today, my friend. And she's come from being the stay-at-home mom to being the Latino firecracker that is mobilizing communities to get involved with government. I thank you for the work you're doing right now. Thank you for my friend Adam, who I haven't seen in social media, the genius that he's got for data. I thank you, Lord, for the people that are planted in this room who are called to change the world. I pray that you put your own Thunder Road kiss on this group. In Jesus' name. Now, your group has some funding needs like any other group. If you're visiting, you came here to hear me, I would say that this is the most advanced and developed core group, and I go around the world. We're looking for groups like this. This is the most advanced potential model of city transformation we got, if you decided you wanted to do it aggressively. But you guys have to fund your own entity, because cash flow is the oxygen of any species. So when you hear about the need for this group to be funded, you need to fund it because the story you're telling about the impact you're having is going to be a model to other cities around the nation that are going to connect with you to see what you're doing. And the Lord is going to lift you up and give you favor as you're faithful to execute this assignment. I encourage you to support. It's a modest budget with ambitious outcomes, and you guys are already achieving them. I checked it out today in the conference room. You're doing enormous things that people don't even know about. So I want you to be committed to the house, because this is your house. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you.